They left me stranded at a truck stop in the middle of nowhere as a harmless prank, laughing as they drove away into the desert night. What they didn't know was that I'd spent 12 years in the Army learning how to turn impossible situations into opportunities. 3 months later, I was sitting in first class, sipping champagne, on my way to watch them lose everything they owned at their foreclosure hearing. But let me start from the beginning, because the road from that gas station to that courtroom taught me more about my own worth than all my years in uniform ever did. My name is Sandra Martinez, and at 48, I thought I'd seen enough of life's curveballs to handle whatever came next. I'd served 3 tours overseas, managed supply chains that kept entire bases running, and somehow survived the transition back to civilian life that breaks so many of us. After the Army, I'd settled into what I thought was a quiet, stable existence in Phoenix, working as a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized shipping company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and used the organizational skills the military had drilled into me. The thing about being a veteran, especially a female veteran, is that people have strange ideas about who you are. Some think you're broken, damaged goods limping through life on disability checks and therapy sessions. Others assume you're some kind of superhero who can fix anything and handle everything without breaking a sweat. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere in the messy middle. I wasn't broken, but I carried scars. I wasn't superhuman, but I'd learned to push through when pushing through was the only option. I'd been renting a small apartment in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy, but clean and safe. My neighbors were a mixed bunch of young professionals, retirees, and families just trying to make it work. I kept to myself mostly, the way you do when you've spent years learning that the person next to you might not be there tomorrow. But, gradually, I'd started to open up a little. There was Maria, the single mom next door, who sometimes asked me to watch her 8-year-old son Diego when she worked late shifts at the hospital. There was Frank, the retired electrician who lived across the hall and had taken to knocking on my door whenever he needed help moving something heavy or reaching something high. And then there were Jake and Brittany Collins. Jake was 29, one of those guys who'd stumbled into a decent-paying job in tech support and thought that made him smarter than everyone around him. He had the kind of confidence that comes from never really being tested, never having to prove himself when the stakes actually mattered. Brittany was 26, pretty in that carefully curated Instagram way, working part-time at a boutique, while spending most of her energy planning elaborate brunches and weekend trips that she documented obsessively on social media. They'd moved into the apartment below mine about 8 months earlier, and somehow I'd gotten pulled into their orbit. It started small. I helped Jake set up his home office when they first moved in, using my logistics background to organize his workspace in a way that actually made sense. When Brittany locked herself out one afternoon, I was the one who climbed through their patio door to let her back in. When their car wouldn't start during that cold snap in January, I was the one who came down with jumper cables and got them running again. Looking back now, I can see the pattern that was forming. I was useful to them. Not valued exactly, but useful. There's a difference, though I didn't recognize it at the time. When you've spent years being part of a team where everyone depends on everyone else, where your competence could mean the difference between life and death, you get used to being needed. You start to confuse being needed with being appreciated. Jake would call me up when he was trying to plan some elaborate surprise for Brittany and needed help with the logistics. "Sandra, you're so good at organizing stuff," he'd say, and I'd find myself spending my Saturday afternoon coordinating flower deliveries and restaurant reservations for someone else's romantic gesture. Brittany would text me when she needed help moving furniture or when her internet was acting up. "You're like, so capable," she'd gush, and I'd head downstairs with my toolbox, fixing whatever needed fixing. Their friend group was an extension of themselves. Young, attractive people who worked in marketing and social media and graphic design, who spent their weekends at trendy restaurants and their vacations in places like Tulum and Nashville. Somehow, I'd become their unofficial problem solver, the person they called when they needed someone competent to handle the practical stuff they couldn't be bothered with. "Sandra's amazing," I'd heard Brittany tell her friends more than once. "She can literally fix anything. It's like having a super handy mom in the building." The comparison to a mom stung a little, but I told myself she meant it as a compliment. After all, I was 22 years older than her. It made sense that she'd see me in a maternal light, but there were other comments too, ones that I filed away without really processing what they meant. Jake joking to his buddies that I was like our building's maintenance guy but free. Brittany laughingly telling someone on the phone that they had this veteran lady upstairs who's totally obsessed with helping us with stuff. The way they'd introduce me at parties as our neighbor Sandra, she's super handy. Rather than using my last name or mentioning anything about my actual career or background, I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that helping people was just who I was, that it felt good to be useful after years of feeling like the civilian world didn't quite know what to do with people like me. When you leave the military, you lose that sense of clear purpose, that knowledge that your skills matter and your contribution makes a difference. Being Jake and Brittany's go-to problem solver gave me back a little of that feeling. The truth was, I was lonely. Not desperately, dramatically lonely, but quietly, persistently lonely in the way that becomes background noise in your life. I'd never married, never had kids. The relationships I'd tried to build over the years had been casualties of deployment schedules and the general challenge of connecting with people who hadn't lived the kind of life I'd lived. My Army friends were scattered across the country, busy with their own post-service lives. My coworkers were friendly enough, but we didn't socialize much outside the office. Jake and Brittany's friend group was young and energetic and full of the kind of casual social interaction I'd been missing. When they invited me to their barbecues and game nights, I felt like I was part of something again. Sure, I was usually the one who ended up cleaning up afterward or fixing whatever had broken during the party, but at least I was included. At least I belonged somewhere. I should have seen the warning signs. The way conversations would stop when I walked into a room, then resume with a slightly different energy. The inside jokes I wasn't part of. The way they'd make plans right in front of me without including me, then seem surprised when I looked hurt. "Oh, Sandra, this is more of a young people thing," Brittany would say with a sweet smile that was supposed to soften the exclusion. But I didn't see it, or I didn't want to see it. I kept showing up, kept helping, kept making myself useful. When Jake's laptop crashed the night before a big presentation, I stayed up until 3 a.m. helping him recover his files. When Brittany's car got towed, I drove her around for 3 days until she could afford to get it back. When their friend Marcus needed help moving apartments, I spent my entire weekend loading and unloading boxes for people who barely knew my name. The dynamic was so subtle, so gradual, that I didn't realize how I'd been slowly relegated to the role of helpful background character in their lives. I was the reliable neighbor, the competent fix-it person, the one who could always be counted on to handle whatever practical problem arose. But I wasn't really their friend, not in any meaningful sense. I was their resource. It all came to a head on a Saturday night in late March. Jake had been planning what he called an epic road trip to Las Vegas for weeks, a guy's weekend with his 3 closest friends to celebrate his birthday. They were going to drive out Friday night, party, all weekend, and come back Sunday evening. Brittany was planning her own girls' trip to Scottsdale the same weekend, leaving me as the unofficial building supervisor while they were all gone. But then Marcus's car broke down, and suddenly they were 1 vehicle short for the Vegas trip. Jake called me Thursday night, his voice taking on that wheedling tone he used when he needed something big. "Sandra, I hate to ask, but we're in a real bind here. Marcus's car's totally dead, and we can't fit 4 guys plus all our stuff in my Honda. I know you've got that SUV and you're not doing anything this weekend anyway, right? Could you maybe drive us out to Vegas? We'd totally pay for gas, and you could just hang out for the weekend. It'd be fun." Something about the way he said, "You're not doing anything this weekend anyway," rubbed me wrong, but I pushed the feeling aside. The truth was, I wasn't doing anything. I'd been planning to clean my apartment and maybe catch up on some reading, the kind of quiet weekend that had become my standard. The idea of a change of scenery, of being part of their adventure instead, of just hearing about it afterward was appealing. "I don't really gamble," I said, though I was already mentally rearranging my weekend plans. "That's totally fine. Vegas isn't just about gambling. There's shows, restaurants, all kinds of stuff. And honestly, it would be amazing to have someone along who actually knows how to navigate and plan stuff. You know how we are with directions." That should have been another red flag. The assumption that I'd naturally fall into the role of unpaid trip coordinator. But instead, I felt flattered. They wanted me along not just for my car, but for my skills. They valued what I brought to the table. "Okay," I said, "but I'll need to book my own room. I'm not sharing with you guys." "Obviously. We'll help you find something nice." "This is going to be so great, Sandra. You're seriously saving our entire trip. The next morning, I spent 2 hours researching hotels and making reservations, finding the best routes, and looking up restaurants and shows. By the time Jake, Marcus, Tyler, and Ben showed up at my apartment Friday evening, I had a complete itinerary printed out, along with backup plans and emergency contacts. I'd packed efficiently, the way the Army had taught me, with everything organized in labeled compartments of my duffel bag. The guys showed up with enough luggage for a month-long expedition, plus a cooler full of beer and enough snacks to feed a small army. They were already drunk, loud and boisterous in the way that made me remember why I'd never been much of a partier even in my 20s. "Sandra, our savior," Jake shouted when I opened the door, throwing his arms around me in a beer-scented hug. "Are you ready for the most epic weekend of your life?" I should have backed out then. Should have looked at these 4 drunk 20-somethings and realized that our ideas of an epic weekend were probably very different. But I'd already committed, already rearranged my weekend, already built up the idea of this trip in my mind as a chance to finally be included in their inner circle instead of just orbiting around the edges. The drive started out fine. My SUV was comfortable and reliable, and I'd plotted a route that avoided the worst of the Friday night traffic. The guys were loud but manageable, playing music and telling stories, and making the kind of crude jokes that I remembered from my Army days. I found myself laughing along, feeling younger and more carefree than I had in months, but somewhere around the 2-hour mark, the dynamic started to shift. The initial excitement of the road trip had worn off, and the alcohol was making them simultaneously more obnoxious and more honest. Tyler, who I'd always thought was the most mature of the group, started making comments about how weird it was that I was coming along on their guys' trip. Marcus kept asking if I was sure I could handle Vegas, like I might faint at the sight of a slot machine. "It's just funny," Ben said from the back seat, his words slightly slurred. "Like, Sandra's cool and all, but she's kind of like our mom, you know? It's like bringing your mom to Vegas." There was that comparison again. Not their friend, not their peer, but their mom. The responsible adult who handled the practical stuff while they had fun. "She's not that old," Jake said, but his tone suggested he was defending a position he wasn't entirely convinced of himself. "I'm 48, I said quietly, keeping my eyes on the road. "That's not exactly ancient." "No, totally not," Tyler said quickly. "It's just, you're in a different life stage. Like, you've got your shit together, you're responsible. We're still figuring stuff out." What he meant, I realized, was that I was old enough to be their designated driver, their trip planner, their backup plan when things went wrong, but not young enough to be their actual friend. I was useful, but I wasn't one of them. We stopped for gas and food at a truck stop about 30 miles outside of Vegas, one of those massive complexes with multiple restaurants and a convenience store the size of a small grocery store. The guys piled out of the car, suddenly energized by the proximity to their destination. They were talking excitedly about which casino to hit first, which shows they wanted to see, which clubs they'd heard were the best. "Sandra, you're buying snacks, right?" Marcus called over his shoulder as he headed toward the bathroom. "You've got the practical stuff covered, not asking if I minded, not offering to split the cost, just assuming I'd handle it." The way they'd been assuming I'd handle everything all along. I filled up the gas tank and went inside to pay, grabbing some water bottles and trail mix for the last leg of the drive. The guys were clustered around the arcade games, feeding quarters into machines and laughing at something on Tyler's phone. They looked young and carefree and completely absorbed in their own world. When I walked back out to the parking lot, my car was gone. I stood in that parking lot for a full minute, blinking, at the empty space where my SUV had been parked, convinced I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. The desert air was cool against my face, carrying the smell of diesel fuel and fried food from the truck stop behind me. Cars and 18-wheelers rumbled past on the interstate, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness. But my silver Honda Pilot was nowhere to be seen. My first thought was theft. Someone had stolen my car while I was inside paying for gas. My heart started pounding as I mentally cataloged everything I'd left in the vehicle. My purse was with me, but my overnight bag was in the back, along with my laptop, some important documents, and about $300 in cash I'd brought for the weekend. I pulled out my phone to call 911, then froze. Through the truck stop's plate glass windows, I could see Jake, Marcus, Tyler, and Ben still clustered around the arcade games, feeding quarters into a basketball shooting game, and laughing at something on someone's phone. They were still here, which meant my car hadn't been stolen by some random criminal. I walked back into the truck stop, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the sounds too loud. I approached the group slowly, giving them time to notice me and explain what was obviously some kind of misunderstanding. "Hey," I said when I was close enough. "Where's my car?" Jake looked up from the game, his face breaking into a wide grin that immediately made my stomach drop. "Oh, Sandra, there you are. We were wondering when you'd figure it out." "Figure what? Out?" I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer and was desperately hoping I was wrong. "Dude, you should see your face right now," Tyler said, pulling out his phone to take a picture. "This is so good." Marcus was laughing so hard he could barely speak. "We got you so good. Oh my God, Sandra, you actually believed we were going. To let you come party with us in Vegas?" The world seemed to tilt sideways. I looked from one face to another, searching for some sign that this was still a joke I wasn't getting, that there was a punchline coming that would make everything make sense again. But all I saw were 4 drunk 20-somethings who thought they'd pulled off the prank of the century. "You took my car," I said slowly, trying to process what was happening. "Borrowed," Jake corrected, holding up my keys and jingling them. "We'll bring it back Sunday night, promise. You can get a ride home with someone else, right? Or take a bus or something?" "Jake," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "That's my car. My overnight bag is in there. My laptop. All my stuff." "Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it," Ben said dismissively. "Nothing's going to happen to your stuff. We're not going to trash your car or anything. We just need it for the weekend." "But how? Am I supposed to get home?" The question came out smaller than I intended, almost childlike. "I don't know. Figure it out." Tyler shrugged. "You're smart. You're always telling us how you handled all kinds of crazy situations in the Army. This should be easy for you." That's when it hit me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment prank. This had been planned. They'd invited me along specifically to get access to my car, then always intended to ditch me somewhere along the way. The whole weekend, the inclusion in their group, the gratitude for my help, it had all been manipulation. "You planned this," I said. Not really a question. Jake's grin widened. "Come on, Sandra. You had to know you weren't actually going to fit in with our group in Vegas. Like, what were you going to do? Sit in the corner while we hit the clubs? Follow us around like a chaperone? This way is better for everyone." "Better for everyone," I repeated. "Yeah, you hate crowds anyway, right? You're always talking about how you prefer quiet nights at home. And Vegas is expensive. This way you don't have to worry about spending money on overpriced drinks and shows you probably wouldn't enjoy anyway." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. They'd listened to me talk about preferring quiet evenings and decided that meant I didn't deserve to choose how to spend my own weekend. They'd taken my consideration for their financial situation and twisted it into evidence that I was too practical, too boring, too old to be part of their fun. Plus, Marcus added, "You're always saying how you like to help people. This is helping us. We really needed a car for this trip and now we have one. Everyone wins. Everyone wins." I stared at him, marveling at the ability to reframe theft and abandonment as a favor I was doing for them. "Sandra, don't be like this." Brittany's voice came from behind me. I turned to see her walking toward us, her phone pressed to her ear. "Jake texted me what happened. It's not a big deal." "It's just a joke." "A joke," I said. "Yeah, a harmless prank. You'll laugh about this later, I promise. Remember that time in college when my sorority sisters left me at that gas station in the middle of nowhere? I was so mad at first, but then I realized it was actually kind of hilarious. It's like a rite of passage or something. I looked at her perfect makeup, her carefully styled hair, her outfit that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 3 months. She was 26 years old and still talking about college pranks like they were the height of human experience. "Brittany," I said carefully, "I'm not in college. I'm a 48-year-old woman, and these are my car keys. I know, but you're so capable and resourceful. If anyone can figure out how to get home from here, it's you. Think of it as an adventure, a challenge, an adventure, a challenge, as if being stranded in the desert by people I'd trusted was some kind of team-building exercise. "You guys are really going to drive away and leave me here?" I asked, still, not quite believing it was real. "It's not like we're leaving you in the middle of nowhere," Jake said defensively. "This is a major truck stop. There's food, bathrooms, Wi-Fi. You'll be fine until you figure out a ride. There's probably a Greyhound station in the next town over," Tyler added helpfully. "Or you could call an Uber. Problem solved." They were already backing away from me, moving toward the exit with the casual confidence of people who'd never had to worry about being stranded anywhere. My car keys were still in Jake's hand, and he was twirling them around his finger like a trophy. "Wait," I called after them. "My bag. Can I at least get my overnight bag?" Jake paused at the door, considering. "Nah, we might need the space. Plus, it's better if we just keep everything together. We'll drop your stuff off when we get back. My laptop is in there, and my medication." "What kind of medication?" Brittany asked, suddenly looking concerned. "Blood pressure medication, and my sleep aid." They exchanged glances, and for a moment I thought they might actually reconsider. Then Jake shrugged. "You'll be home before you need to take it again. It's only 2 days. "Jake," I said, my voice taking on an edge I hadn't intended. "I need that medication. You can't just— Sandra, chill. You're being dramatic. It's 2 days. You're not going to die from missing 2 days of blood pressure meds." That was it. The moment when I realized that these people I'd been trying so hard to please, these friends I'd been bending over backward to help, genuinely did not care if I lived or died. To them, I was so unimportant that my health and safety were acceptable casualties in their stupid prank. I watched them walk out the door, heard my car engine start up in the parking lot. Through the window, I could see Jake behind the wheel, adjusting the mirrors. Marcus was riding shotgun, already connecting his phone to my stereo system. Tyler and Ben were in the back, passing around a bottle of something they'd apparently been hiding. They drove away without looking back. I stood there in the fluorescent brightness of the truck stop, surrounded by the sounds of slot machines and diesel engines and late-night travelers, trying to process what had just happened. 3 hours ago, I'd been driving to Las Vegas with people I thought were my friends. Now I was stranded in the middle of the Nevada desert, watching my own car disappear into the distance. The truck stop was one of those 24-hour complexes that serves as an oasis for long-haul truckers and road trippers. It had a McDonald's, a Subway, a gift shop full of overpriced snacks and tourist t-shirts, and a gaming area with slot machines and video poker. There were probably 50 people scattered throughout the building, truckers grabbing coffee and shower tokens, families with cranky kids stretching their legs, a few gamblers feeding quarters into machines. I bought a cup of coffee and found a table in the McDonald's area, pulling out my phone to assess my options. It was 9:30 p.m. on a Friday night, and I was approximately 200 miles from home with no car and no overnight bag. The nearest town, according to my GPS, was Beatty, Nevada, population 1,010, about 15 miles north. Las Vegas was 30 miles south, but that was where my car and my former friends were headed. I could call a taxi, but the cost to get back to Phoenix would be astronomical, probably $600 or $700, money I didn't have sitting around for emergency transportation. I could rent a car, but the nearest rental agency was in Las Vegas, and getting there would require the same expensive taxi ride. I could call someone to come pick me up, but who? Maria was working her night shift at the hospital and couldn't leave. Frank was 73 years old and had never driven farther than the grocery store since his wife died. My coworkers were acquaintances, not the kind of friends you call at 10 p.m. to ask for a 400-mile rescue mission. There was a Greyhound station in Las Vegas, but the next bus to Phoenix didn't leave until Sunday afternoon, and I'd need somewhere to stay for 2 nights. The cheapest hotels I could find on my phone were still over $100 a night, and that was assuming I could get there without my car. I sat there sipping my coffee and running calculations, feeling the walls of my limited options closing in around me. This was what it meant to be truly alone. Not just lonely, but actually alone, with no safety net and no one to call. A trucker at the next table was talking on his phone, explaining to someone that he'd be home Tuesday instead of Monday because of a delivery delay. His voice was tired but patient, the kind of tone you use with someone who matters to you, someone who's waiting for you and worried about your safety. I wondered if anyone would notice I was missing. My job didn't expect me back until Monday. My neighbors knew I was going out of town for the weekend. If something happened to me here, if I just disappeared, how long would it be before anyone realized I was gone? The thought was more terrifying than being stranded, not just because of the practical implications, but because of what it said about the life I'd built for myself. I'd spent so much energy trying to be useful to people who didn't actually care about me that I'd forgotten to build relationships with people who did. I pulled up Jake's number on my phone and called him. It went straight to voicemail. "Jake, this isn't funny anymore," I said after the beep. "I need my car back. I need my medication. You can't just leave me here. Call me back." I called again. 10 minutes later. Still voicemail. I tried Brittany next, figuring she might be more reasonable. She answered on the third ring, music and laughter loud in the background. "Sandra, what's up?" "Brittany, I need you to talk to Jake. This has gone too far. I'm stranded here with no way to get home." "Oh my God, are you still upset about that?" "Sandra, it's just a prank. Don't be so sensitive." "I'm not being sensitive. I'm being practical. I have no way to get home, and I need my medication. Can't you just take a bus or something? I'm sure there's a bus. The next bus doesn't leave until Sunday, and I don't have anywhere to stay." "Well, that's not really our problem, is it? You're the one who always says you can handle anything. This is your chance to prove it." The line went dead. She'd hung up on me. I sat there staring at my phone, finally understanding something I should have seen months ago. To them, I wasn't a person with feelings and needs and limitations. I was a character in their story, the reliable older neighbor who existed to make their lives easier. When I stopped being useful and started having needs of my own, I became an inconvenience to be dismissed. The coffee was getting cold in my hands, but I kept holding onto the cup because it was warm and real and something to focus on, besides the growing panic in my chest. Around me, the truck stop continued its 24-hour rhythm, people coming and going, engines starting and stopping, the constant background hum of a place that never sleeps. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my friends had taken my car keys and driven away? They'd ask if I'd given them permission to drive my car, and technically, I had. They'd ask if I'd been threatened or coerced, and I hadn't been. It was theft, morally and practically, but legally. It was probably just a civil matter. Besides, I knew how these things went for people like me. Middle-aged woman having a dispute with her younger friends. The police would see it as a personal problem, not a crime worth their time. I was completely and utterly on my own. The realization that I was truly stranded settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. I sat in that McDonald's booth for another hour, cycling through the same impossible calculations, the same dead-end phone calls, the same crushing understanding that the people I'd trusted had left. Me here without a second thought. The coffee had long gone cold, but I kept wrapping my hands around the cup because it gave me something to hold on to in a world that suddenly felt like it was spinning out of control. Around me, the truck stop maintained its steady rhythm of travelers, coming and going. I watched families pile back into minivans after bathroom breaks, their kids cranky and tired, but secure in the knowledge that they were going somewhere, that someone was responsible for getting them home safely. I watched truckers grab coffee and snacks for the road, checking their phones for messages from dispatchers and loved ones who were tracking their progress. Everyone had somewhere to be, someone expecting them, a plan that made sense. Everyone. Except me. I tried calling my insurance company to see if roadside assistance might cover something like this, but after being transferred 3 times and spending 20 minutes on hold, I was told that being abandoned by friends didn't qualify as a covered emergency. Now, if your car had broken down, we could help, the representative explained patiently. But if someone else is driving your vehicle with your permission, that's not really an insurance matter. But I didn't give them permission to strand me here, I protested. Did you give them permission to drive your car? Well, yes, but then I'm sorry, ma'am, but this sounds like a personal dispute. You might want to contact a local law enforcement. I hung up and immediately called the county sheriff's office, but the dispatcher was even less helpful. So you're saying you voluntarily came on this trip and you gave them the keys to your vehicle? Yes, but they were supposed to take me to Las Vegas, not abandon me at a gas station. Has your vehicle been stolen? Not exactly stolen, but, ma'am, if you gave someone permission to drive your car and they're not refusing to return it, this sounds like a civil matter. Now, if they don't bring the car back when they said they would, then you can file a report for theft. What am I supposed to do until Sunday? "I'm sorry, ma'am, but arranging transportation isn't really something we can help with." Every phone call was the same story. Technically, I had consented to the initial arrangement. Technically, they weren't refusing to return my car, just delaying the return. Technically, I was a competent adult who should be able to figure out her own transportation. Problems. The fact that I'd been manipulated and deceived was irrelevant to the people whose job it was to help in emergencies. I walked outside to get some air and immediately regretted it. The desert night was colder than I'd expected, and I was dressed for the climate-controlled comfort of a car and indoor venues, not for standing around in the open air. The wind carried grit and the smell of diesel exhaust, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the lonely sound of a train whistle echoing across the empty landscape. The parking lot stretched out in all directions, filled with 18-wheelers, and RVs and the occasional passenger car. Most of the trucks had their running lights on, creating a constellation of red and amber dots in the darkness. Some had their engines idling, a low rumble that vibrated through the ground beneath my feet. This was a world I'd never really paid attention to before. The network of people who moved goods across the country, who lived their lives in motion, who made the economy function while the rest of us slept. I walked over to one of the picnics, tables near the building, and sat down, pulling my jacket tighter around myself. My phone showed 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, and for a moment, my heart leaped with the hope that maybe Jake had come to his senses and was calling to apologize, to tell me this had all gone too far. But when I called the number back, it was a recording about my car's extended warranty. That's when I started to cry. Not the dramatic, cathartic crying you see in movies, but the quiet, exhausted crying of someone who's finally run out of options and energy. I sat at that picnic table in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the sounds of trucks and traffic and slot machines, and let myself feel the full weight of how alone I really was. I thought about the last conversation I'd had with my sister Elena before she died 2 years ago. She'd been in the hospital then, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed, her voice weak but still sharp with the intelligence that had made her such a good teacher for 30 years. "Sandra," she'd said, gripping my hand with surprising strength, "promise me you won't disappear after I'm gone." "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't just fade into the background of other people's lives. Don't become one of those invisible women who exist only to make everyone else's life easier. You matter too much for that." I'd promised her I wouldn't, but sitting there in that truck stop parking lot, I realized I'd broken that promise completely. I'd spent the last 2 years doing exactly what she'd warned me against, making myself useful to people who saw me as a convenience rather than a person, investing my time and energy in relationships that were fundamentally one-sided. Elena would have been furious about what Jake and his friends had done to me. She would have driven the 400 miles herself to come get me, then probably would have tracked them down in Las Vegas to give them a piece of her mind. She'd always been the fierce one, the one who stood up for herself and demanded respect. I'd been the one who kept the peace, who smoothed things over, who made sure everyone else was comfortable even when I wasn't. But Elena was gone, and I was sitting alone at a truck stop at 11:30 on a Friday night, abandoned by people who thought my feelings were less important than their weekend plans. A semi-truck pulled into the space nearest to my picnic table, its air brakes hissing as it came to a stop. The driver climbed down from the cab, a woman about my age with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired but competent, the way people do when they've spent years solving problems and getting things done. "You okay, honey?" she asked, noticing me sitting there in the dark. "Just having a rough night?" I said, wiping my face with my sleeve. "Car trouble?" "Friend trouble?" She nodded knowingly. "That's usually worse than car trouble. Car trouble you can fix?" We talked for a few minutes while she stretched her legs and checked her load. Her name was Carol, and she'd been driving trucks for 15 years, ever since her husband died and left her with a mountain of medical debt. She was hauling furniture from a factory in North Carolina to distributors in California, a route she made 6 times a year. "You need a ride somewhere?" she asked. "I'm not supposed to take passengers, but if you're really stuck..." The offer was tempting, but Phoenix wasn't on her route, and I couldn't ask her to risk her job for someone she'd just met. I thanked her and watched her climb back into her cab, envying her sense of purpose, her clear destination, her ability to be completely self-sufficient. After Carol drove away, I went back inside to use the bathroom and splash some cold water on my face. The mirror showed me exactly what I expected. A middle-aged woman who looked like she'd been crying, tired and rumpled, and completely out of place in this neon-bright world of slot machines and convenience food. But as I looked at myself, something shifted. Maybe it was the conversation with Carol, or maybe I just hit bottom hard enough to bounce back a little, but I found myself really seeing my reflection for the first time in months. This was Sandra Martinez, who'd served 3 tours overseas, who'd managed supply chains in war zones, who'd rebuilt her entire life from scratch when she came home. This was a woman who'd survived things that would break other people. I'd let Jake and Brittany and their friends convince me that my competence was just a useful quirk, that my experience was just background noise, that my feelings were less important than their convenience. But standing there in that truck stop bathroom, I remembered something I'd forgotten in all the months of trying to fit into their world. I was tougher than all of them combined. I walked back out to the main area and found the information desk, where a bored-looking teenager was playing games on his phone. "Excuse me," I said. "What's the Wi-Fi password here?" He looked up, seeming surprised that anyone would actually ask him to do his job. It's truck stop 123 with a capital T." I found a table with a good view of the parking lot and opened my laptop, grateful that I'd brought it with me instead of leaving it in the car. If I was going to be here for a while, I might as well make productive use of the time. First, I documented everything. I took screenshots of Jake's and Brittany's social media posts about the Vegas trip, saved the text messages they'd sent me about needing my car, wrote down a timeline of exactly what had happened and when. If this turned into a legal matter, I wanted a paper trail. Then I started researching my options more systematically. The Greyhound station in Las Vegas was indeed my best bet for getting home, but I didn't have to wait until Sunday if I was willing to take a more complicated route. There was a bus leaving Saturday afternoon that would get me to Phoenix via Los Angeles, with a 6-hour layover. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being stranded until Sunday. The immediate problem was getting to Las Vegas without my car. Taxis and ride shares were prohibitively expensive, but there were other options I hadn't considered. A shuttle. Service ran from the truck stop to several Las Vegas hotels twice a day, primarily for tourists who flew into Vegas and wanted to visit the nearby attractions. The next shuttle was at 7 a.m. and a one-way ticket cost $45. I booked a seat on the shuttle and a ticket on the Saturday afternoon bus, then found the cheapest hotel room I could get in Las Vegas for one night. The total cost was going to be almost $300. Money I hadn't planned to spend, money that would make the next few weeks tight financially, but it was better than being stranded, and it was certainly better than depending on Jake and his friends to keep their promise about returning my car. With my immediate transportation sorted out, I turned my attention to the bigger picture. I opened a new document and started writing, not sure at first what I was writing or why, but feeling the need to get the words out of my head and onto the screen. "My name is Sandra Martinez," I wrote, "and I am 48 years old. Tonight, 4 people I thought were my friends abandoned me at a truck stop in the middle of the Nevada desert because they wanted to use my car for their vacation but didn't want me to come along. They told me it was a joke, that I should be able to figure out how to get home on my own because I'm so capable and resourceful." I kept writing, telling the story of the last 8 months, the gradual process of being reduced from a person to a resource, the casual cruelty disguised as friendship. I wrote about all the times I'd helped them, all the ways I'd made myself useful, all the signals I'd ignored that should have told me I was being used. But I also wrote about who I really was, not the convenient neighbor they saw, but the actual person with an actual history. I wrote about my military service, about the lives I'd saved and the problems I'd solved, and the respect I'd earned from people who understood what competence really meant. I wrote about the business I was planning to start, using my logistics background to help small companies streamline their operations. I wrote about my sister and the promise I'd made to her, the promise I'd broken by disappearing into the background of other people's stories. By the time I finished writing, it was almost 3 a.m., and I had 12 pages of what amounted to a manifesto. Reading it back, I realized it wasn't just therapeutic rambling. It was the beginning of something bigger, a reckoning with the way I'd been living my life and a plan for changing it. I saved the document and closed my laptop, feeling more clear-headed than I had in hours. The truck stop was quieter now, most of the travelers having moved on to their destinations. A few insomniacs were still feeding quarters into the slot machines, and there was a steady trickle of truckers grabbing coffee and restrooms breaks. But the frantic energy of the evening rush had settled into the quieter rhythm of the deep night hours. I found a relatively comfortable chair in the seating area and settled in to wait for morning. Sleep wasn't really an option. The lights were too bright and the noise too constant. But I could rest, and I could think. For the first time since Jake had jingled my car keys at me 6 hours ago, I felt like I had some control over my situation. I had a plan for getting home, I had documentation of what had happened, and I had the beginnings of a much larger plan for making sure nothing like this ever happened to me again. I thought about Carol, the truck driver who'd offered to help a stranger because she understood what it meant to be stranded and alone. I thought about the shuttle driver who would pick me up in a few hours, doing his job with professional competence, even though he'd probably never see me again. I thought about the network of people who kept the world running, not the flashy, social media-worthy people like Jake and Brittany, but the ones who showed up and did their jobs and treated other people with basic human decency. Those were my people, I realized. Not the 20-something party crowd who saw me as a useful appliance, but the grown-ups who understood that life was about more than Instagram posts and weekend adventures. People who knew that real strength wasn't about looking good in photos, but about being someone others could count on when things went wrong. I pulled out my phone and opened a notes app, starting a list of people I wanted to reconnect with. Army buddies I'd lost touch with. Coworkers who'd invited me to things I'd turned down because I was busy helping Jake and Brittany with their latest crisis. Neighbors like Maria and Frank who'd shown genuine appreciation for my help instead of treating it as their due. By 6 a.m., the truck stop was starting to come alive again with the morning rush. I bought coffee and a breakfast sandwich, freshened up in the bathroom, and positioned myself near the entrance to watch for the shuttle van. I felt tired but oddly optimistic, like someone who'd survived a test she hadn't known she was taking. Salam. Shuttle arrived right on time, driven by a cheerful man in his 60s who helped me load my laptop bag and treated me with the kind of professional courtesy I'd forgotten existed. As we pulled out of the truck stop parking lot, I looked back at the place where I'd spent the worst and most enlightening night of my recent life. I was going home, but I wasn't going back to the life I'd been living. That version of Sandra Martinez. The one who made herself useful to people who didn't appreciate her, who confused being needed with being valued, was staying behind at that truck stop. The woman on this shuttle had places to go and things to do, and she didn't need anyone's permission to matter. The shuttle ride to Las Vegas gave me 2 hours to think, and by the time we pulled up to the Stratosphere Hotel, I had made a decision. That would have seemed impossible 12 hours earlier. I wasn't just going home to lick my wounds and pretend this had never happened. I was going to make sure Jake, Brittany, and their friends understood exactly what they had done, and more. Importantly, I was going to make sure they faced real consequences for it. The bus station was a 40-minute walk from the hotel, but I welcomed the exercise and the chance to see Las Vegas in daylight without the pressure of trying to fit in with people half my age. The city looked different than I'd expected. Less glamorous, more practical, a working town built around the business of entertainment rather than the fantasy of it. Construction workers were repairing sidewalks, delivery trucks were making their rounds, and casino employees in polyester uniforms were walking to work with the tired efficiency of people who understood that someone had to keep the magic running. Behind the scenes, I bought my bus ticket and found a quiet corner of the station to continue the work I'd started at the truck stop. Opening my laptop, I began researching everything I could find about Jake and Brittany's lives, not out of spite, but with the methodical thoroughness that had served me well in the military. If they wanted to treat this like a game, I was going, to make sure I understood all the rules. Social media made it easy. Jake worked for a tech support company called Digital Solutions Plus, where according to his LinkedIn profile, he was a customer success specialist who leveraged cutting-edge communication strategies to optimize client satisfaction metrics. In plain English, he answered phone calls from people whose computers weren't working. Brittany worked part-time at a boutique called Luxe Style, but her Instagram suggested her real job was being an influencer with 3,000 followers who posted sponsored content for workout supplements and skincare products. But the really interesting information came from diving deeper into their financial situation. Jake's company had been mentioned in several local business articles about struggling small businesses in the post-pandemic economy. Digital Solutions Plus had laid off 30% of their workforce 6 months ago, and several former employees had left reviews on job sites complaining about delayed paychecks and benefit cuts. Brittany's boutique was even worse off. A quick search of business registration records showed that Lux Style was 3 months behind on their commercial rent, and the owner had filed for bankruptcy protection. The store was scheduled to close at the end of the month. Neither of them knew I knew any of this. They'd been carefully maintaining their social media image of success and prosperity while their actual lives were falling apart behind the scenes. The expensive vacations, the designer clothes, the elaborate restaurant meals, it was all credit card debt and borrowed time. I kept digging. Their apartment complex had been sold to a new management company 4 months ago, and the new owners had been aggressively raising rents and evicting tenants who couldn't keep up with the increases. Jake and Brittany's rent had gone from $1,200 a month to $1,800, and based on some documents I found through public record searches, they were already 2 months behind. The picture that emerged was of two people who were barely keeping their heads above water financially, using social media and expensive purchases to maintain an illusion of prosperity while everything collapsed around them. No wonder they'd been so eager to use my car for their Vegas trip. They probably couldn't afford the gas for their own car, assuming it hadn't been repossessed already. Understanding their situation didn't make me feel sorry for them. If anything, it made me angrier. They were in financial trouble, but instead of asking for help or admitting they were struggling, they'd chosen to manipulate and use someone who would have gladly helped them if they'd been honest. Instead of treating me like a friend who might understand money problems, they'd treated me like a resource to be exploited. I opened a new document and began crafting what I privately thought of as my documentation package. I started with a detailed timeline of every interaction I'd had with Jake and Brittany over the past 8 months, every favor I'd done, every time I'd helped them out of a jam. I included screenshots of text messages where they'd asked for help, photos of me working on their apartment projects, receipts for money I'd spent on their behalf. Then I documented Friday night in excruciating detail. The phone call where Jake had asked me to drive them to Vegas, the drive itself, and the casual comments about me being like their mom, the moment they'd abandoned me at the truck stop, and the subsequent phone calls where they dismissed my concerns. I included timestamps, GPS coordinates from my phone, and screenshots of their social media posts from Vegas showing them partying with my car. But I didn't stop there. I also documented their financial situation, their employment status, their housing problems. I wasn't planning to use this information to hurt them, but I wanted them to understand that I wasn't the naive, helpful neighbor they thought I was. I was someone who knew how to gather intelligence, how to understand leverage, how to prepare for every possible scenario. The 6-hour layover in Los Angeles gave me time to continue my research and planning. I found a quiet spot in the airport and called my insurance company again, this time armed with more specific information about my situation. I need to clarify something about my earlier call, I told the representative. The people who have my car have taken it to Las Vegas without my permission and are refusing to return it when I've asked them to. They've also taken my personal belongings, including prescription medication. Does this change whether I can file a claim? This time, the representative was more helpful. If they're refusing to return your vehicle when you've requested it, that could constitute theft, which would be covered under your comprehensive coverage. But you'd need to file a police report first. What about the cost of getting home? I had to buy bus tickets and hotel rooms because they stranded me. Those expenses might be covered under your emergency roadside assistance if we determine that. The vehicle was essentially stolen. Can you hold while I check with my supervisor? After 20 minutes on hold, she came back with better news. We can cover up to $500 in emergency transportation costs if you file a police report for vehicle theft. And if your car was damaged while it was being used without your permission, that would definitely be covered. I called the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and filed a report over the phone, explaining that I'd given someone permission to drive my car to Las Vegas, but they were now refusing to return it when requested. The officer who took the report was sympathetic and gave me a case number that I could use with my insurance company. Ma'am, technically, this started as a civil matter since you initially gave them permission, he explained. But once you asked for the car back and they refused, it became theft. When they return to Las Vegas tomorrow, we can have officers waiting to recover your vehicle. They're supposed to drive it back to Phoenix tomorrow night. That's what they told you, but are you confident they'll actually do it? If they were willing to abandon you at a truck stop, They might be willing to keep your car too. He had a point. I gave him Jake's phone number and the address of the hotel where they were staying, along with my car's license plate number and VIN. If they tried to skip town with my vehicle, at least the police would have a head start on tracking them down. By the time my bus pulled into Phoenix at 10 p.m. on Saturday, I had assembled a comprehensive file on Jake and Brittany's situation and had backup plans for every possible scenario. If they returned my car as promised, I would still have documentation of what they'd done and could decide how to respond. If they didn't return it, I'd already filed the necessary reports and could pursue legal action. But more importantly, I'd used the travel time to completely reframe my understanding of what had happened. This wasn't just a prank that had gone too far or a misunderstanding between friends. This was a pattern of exploitation that had been building for months, culminating in an act of casual cruelty that revealed exactly how little they valued me as a person. Maria was waiting for me at the bus station, having insisted on picking me up when I'd called to let her know I was coming home early. She took one look at my face and didn't ask questions, just gave me a hug and helped me into her car. The bus station was a 40-minute walk from the hotel, but I welcomed the exercise and the chance to see Las Vegas in daylight without the pressure of trying to fit in with people half my age. The city looked different than I'd expected. Less glamorous, more practical, a working town built around the business of entertainment rather than the fantasy of it. Construction workers were repairing sidewalks, delivery trucks were making their rounds, and casino employees in polyester uniforms were walking to work with the tired efficiency of people who understood that someone had to keep the magic running. Behind the scenes, I bought my bus ticket and found a quiet corner of the station to continue the work I'd started at the truck stop. Opening my laptop, I began researching everything I could find about Jake and Brittany's lives, not out of spite, but with the methodical thoroughness that had served me well in the military. If they wanted to treat this like a game, I was going to make sure I understood all the rules. Social media made it easy. Jake worked for a tech support company called Digital Solutions Plus, where according to his LinkedIn profile, he was a customer success specialist who leveraged cutting-edge communication strategies to optimize client satisfaction metrics. In plain English, he answered phone calls from people whose computers weren't working. Brittany worked part-time at a boutique called Luxe Style, but her Instagram suggested her real job was being an influencer with 3,000 followers who posted sponsored content for workout supplements and skincare products. But the really interesting information came from diving deeper into their financial situation. Jake's company had been mentioned in several local business articles about struggling small businesses in the post-pandemic economy. Digital Solutions Plus had laid off 30% of their workforce 6 months ago, and several former employees had left reviews on job sites complaining about delayed paychecks and benefit cuts. Brittany's boutique was even worse off. A quick search of business registration records showed that Luxe Style was 3 months behind on their commercial rent, and the owner had filed for bankruptcy protection. The store was scheduled to close at the end of the month. Neither of them knew I knew any of this. They'd been carefully maintaining their social media image of success and prosperity while their actual lives were falling apart behind the scenes. The expensive vacations, the designer clothes, the elaborate restaurant meals, it was all credit card debt and borrowed time. I kept digging. Their apartment complex had been sold to a new management company 4 months ago, and the new owners had been aggressively raising rents and evicting tenants who couldn't keep up with the increases. Jake and Brittany's rent had gone from $1,200 a month to $1,800, and based on some documents I found through public record searches, they were already 2 months behind. The picture that emerged was of two people who were barely keeping their heads above water financially, using social media and expensive purchases to maintain an illusion of prosperity while everything collapsed around them. No wonder they'd been so eager to use my car for their Vegas trip. They probably couldn't afford the gas for their own car, assuming it hadn't been repossessed already. Understanding their situation didn't make me feel sorry for them. If anything, it made me angrier. They were in financial trouble, but instead of asking for help or admitting they were struggling, they'd chosen to manipulate and use someone who would have gladly helped them if they'd been honest. Instead of treating me like a friend who might understand money problems, they'd treated me like a resource to be exploited. I opened a new document and began crafting what I privately thought of as my documentation package. I started with a detailed timeline of every interaction I'd had with Jake and Brittany over the past 8 months, every favor I'd done, every time I'd helped them out of a jam. I included screenshots of text messages where they'd asked for help, photos of me working on their apartment projects, receipts for money I'd spent on their behalf. Then I documented Friday night in excruciating detail. The phone call where Jake had asked me to drive them to Vegas, the drive itself, and the casual comments about me being like their mom, the moment they'd abandoned me at the truck stop, and the subsequent phone calls where they dismissed my concerns. I included timestamps, GPS coordinates from my phone, and screenshots of their social media posts from Vegas showing them partying with my car. But I didn't stop there. I also documented their financial situation, their employment status, their housing problems. I wasn't planning to use this information to hurt them, but I wanted them to understand that I wasn't the naive, helpful neighbor they thought I was. I was someone who knew how to gather intelligence, how to understand leverage, how to prepare for every possible scenario. The 6-hour layover in Los Angeles gave me time to continue my research and planning. I found a quiet spot in the airport and called my insurance company again, this time armed with more specific information about my situation. I need to clarify something about my earlier call, I told the representative. The people who have my car have taken it to Las Vegas without my permission and are refusing to return it when I've asked them to. They've also taken my personal belongings, including prescription medication. Does this change whether I can file a claim? This time, the representative was more helpful. If they're refusing to return your vehicle when you've requested it, that could constitute theft, which would be covered under your comprehensive coverage. But you'd need to file a police report first. What about the cost of getting home? I had to buy bus tickets and hotel rooms because they stranded me. Those expenses might be covered under your emergency roadside assistance if we determine that. The vehicle was essentially stolen. Can you hold while I check with my supervisor? After 20 minutes on hold, she came back with better news. We can cover up to $500 in emergency transportation costs if you file a police report for vehicle theft. And if your car was damaged while it was being used without your permission, that would definitely be covered. I called the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and filed a report over the phone, explaining that I'd given someone permission to drive my car to Las Vegas, but they were now refusing to return it when requested. The officer who took the report was sympathetic and gave me a case number that I could use with my insurance company. Ma'am, technically, this started as a civil matter since you initially gave them permission, he explained. But once you asked for the car back and they refused, it became theft. When they return to Las Vegas tomorrow, we can have officers waiting to recover your vehicle. They're supposed to drive it back to Phoenix tomorrow night. That's what they told you, but are you confident they'll actually do it? If they were willing to abandon you at a truck stop, they might be willing to keep your car too. He had a point. I gave him Jake's phone number and the address of the hotel where they were staying, along with my car's license plate number and VIN. If they tried to skip town with my vehicle, at least the police would have a head start on tracking them down. By the time my bus pulled into Phoenix at 10 p.m. on Saturday, I had assembled a comprehensive file on Jake and Brittany's situation and had backup plans for every possible scenario. If they returned my car as promised, I would still have documentation of what they'd done and could decide how to respond. If they didn't return it, I'd already filed the necessary reports and could pursue legal action. But more importantly, I'd used the travel time to completely reframe my understanding of what had happened. This wasn't just a prank that had gone too far or a misunderstanding between friends. This was a pattern of exploitation that had been building for months, culminating in an act of casual cruelty that revealed exactly how little they valued me as a person. Maria was waiting for me at the bus station, having insisted on picking me up when I'd called to let her know I was coming home early. She took one look at my face and didn't ask questions, just gave me a hug and helped me into her car. "You want to talk about it?" she asked as we drove through the quiet Sunday night streets. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tonight I just want to go home and sleep in my own bed." But I didn't sleep. I spent the night transferring all my research and documentation to my home computer, organizing everything into clearly labeled folders and preparing for whatever Monday would bring. I had no idea whether Jake would actually return my car as promised, but I was ready for either scenario. At 7 a.m., my phone rang. It was Jake, and he sounded terrible, hungover, tired, and stressed in a way that suggested his Vegas weekend hadn't gone as planned. "Sandra, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Yes, we do. When are you bringing my car back?" That's what I need to talk to you about. We had some problems last night." My heart sank. What kind of problems? Well, we were at this club, and when we came back to the parking garage, your car was gone. We think it might have been stolen. For a moment, I was too shocked to respond. You think my car was stolen? Yeah, we called the police and everything. They said it happens a lot in Vegas, especially with out-of-state plates. Criminals target tourists because they know the cars won't be reported missing right away. Jake, I said slowly, are you telling me that my car, with all my belongings in it, has been stolen in Las Vegas? Look, I know this is bad, but it's not our fault. We're victims here too. We're stuck in Vegas with no way to get home. Something in his tone didn't ring true. He sounded more nervous than devastated, more like someone trying to sell a story than someone reporting a genuine crisis. What's the police report number? I asked. The what? The police report number. You said you called the police about the stolen car. I need the report number for my insurance. There was a long pause. I don't have it with me right now. Marcus has all that information. Then put Marcus on the phone. He's still asleep. Look, Sandra, I know you're upset, but I hung up on him and immediately called the Las Vegas Police Department, using the non-emergency number I'd found during my research the day before. I need to check on a police report that was supposedly filed last night, I told the dispatcher. My car was allegedly stolen from a casino parking garage. She took down my information and put me on hold. When she came back, her news wasn't surprising. Ma'am, I don't show any reports filed for a stolen vehicle matching your description. Are you sure your friends actually contacted us? No, I said. I'm not sure of anything they've told me, but I filed a report yesterday about the same vehicle being taken without permission. Case number 2024-156789. Oh yes, I see that report. Officer Martinez is handling that case. Would you like me to transfer you? Officer Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, was exactly the kind of competent professional I'd hoped to deal with. She'd already done some preliminary investigation based on my report, and had tracked my car to the Bellagio, where it was parked in the self-park garage with no signs of theft or damage. Your friends are still registered at their hotel, she told me. The car hasn't been reported stolen by them, and hotel security cameras show them using it as recently as this morning to go get breakfast. Ma'am, I think they're lying to you about it being stolen. Can you recover it? Absolutely. Since you've already filed a theft report and they're refusing to return your property, we can treat this as a straightforward vehicle recovery. Do you want to press charges? I thought about it for a long moment. Pressing charges would mean Jake and his friends would face criminal penalties for what they'd done. It would also mean a very public and messy legal process that could drag on for months. Let me get my car back first, I said. Then I'll decide about charges. Fair enough. We'll have officers at their hotel within the hour. Is there a number where we can reach you when we've recovered the vehicle? I gave her my contact information and then sat down to wait, feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation. My car wasn't actually stolen, which meant my belongings were safe and I wouldn't have to deal with insurance claims and replacement vehicles. But it also meant that Jake had looked me in the eye, or at least in the voice, and lied to me about something he knew would cause me significant distress and financial hardship. The casual cruelty of abandoning me at a truck stop was bad enough. But lying about my car being stolen, knowing that I would have to file insurance claims and potentially be without transportation for weeks while the claim was processed, showed a level of callous indifference to my well-being that I found breathtaking. These weren't people who had made a mistake or let a prank go too far. These were people who genuinely didn't care if their actions destroyed my life, as long as they got what they wanted from me. Officer Martinez called me back 2 hours later with an update that was both satisfying and infuriating. We recovered your vehicle without incident, she reported. Your friends were not happy to see us. The one who answered the door tried to claim they had permission to keep the car until tonight, but when we explained that permission had been revoked and showed them the theft report, they handed over the keys pretty quickly. How did they seem? Scared and angry. They kept saying it was all a misunderstanding, that you were overreacting, that kind of thing. The young woman was crying and saying they were just trying to have fun. What about my belongings? Everything appears to be there. Your overnight bag, laptop, medication, it's all in the car. We did notice some evidence of partying. Empty bottles, some damage to the interior. You'll want to document that for your insurance if you decide to file a claim. Damage, stains on the upholstery, some scratches on the dashboard, that kind of thing. Nothing major, but definitely more than normal wear and tear. So they'd trashed my car while they were using it, then tried to lie about it being stolen to avoid having to face me when they returned it. Each new detail made their behavior worse, not better. The car will be towed back to Phoenix at no charge to you, Officer Martinez continued. It should be at the impound lot by this evening. You can pick it up any time after 6 p.m. What about pressing charges? That's still your decision to make. We have plenty of evidence if you want to pursue it. Documentation of the theft report, witness statements from hotel staff, photos of the damage to your vehicle. These aren't kids, ma'am. They're adults who made adult decisions, and there are consequences for those decisions. I thanked her and hung up, then sat in my kitchen staring out the window at the apartment complex where Jake and Brittany lived. I could see their patio from my kitchen window, with its expensive outdoor furniture and decorative plants that I'd helped them arrange when they first moved in. In a few hours, they'd be driving back from Las Vegas in whatever rental car they'd managed to scrape together, probably planning how to spin this story to make themselves look like the victims. They'd probably come upstairs to apologize, to try to smooth things over, to convince me that this had all been a harmless misunderstanding that got out of hand. But I wasn't the same person who'd driven them to Vegas on Friday night. That Sandra Martinez had been desperate to be included, willing to accept crumbs of friendship from people who saw her as useful rather than valuable. The Sandra Martinez sitting in this kitchen had spent 2 days learning exactly what she was capable of when she stopped trying to please everyone else and started focusing on taking care of herself. I opened my laptop and began typing a new document, this one addressed to Jake and Brittany themselves. It was time to let them know that the game had changed and that they were no longer playing with someone who didn't understand the rules. The letter I wrote to Jake and Brittany was unlike anything I'd ever composed before. Not angry, not pleading, just coldly factual in a way that would have made my drill sergeants proud. I laid out everything I knew about their financial situation, their employment problems, their housing crisis. I included timestamps of their lies, screenshots of their social media posts from Vegas, and copies of the police reports I'd filed. By the time I finished, it was clear that I wasn't the helpful neighbor they could manipulate anymore. I was someone who had done her homework and was prepared for war, but I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, I printed it out and set it aside, then spent the afternoon doing something I should have done months ago. I called the people in my life who actually mattered. I started with my old army buddy, Carmen Rodriguez, who'd been trying to get me to visit her in Denver for over a year. "Sandra, please tell me you're finally ready to come see me," Carmen said when she picked up the phone. "Actually, I'm calling because I need some advice, and maybe a reality check." I told her the whole story, not just the Vegas incident, but the entire 8 months of being Jake and Brittany's unpaid problem solver. Carmen listened without interrupting, the way she'd learned to do during our years in the service. And when I finished, her response was immediate and unambiguous. "Girl, what the hell is wrong with you?" "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Sandra Martinez, the woman who once told a colonel to go screw himself because he was wasting our unit's time, has been letting a couple of kids half her age treat her like their personal servant? What happened to you?" The question hit harder than I'd expected. What had happened to me? How had I gone from being someone who commanded respect to someone who begged for scraps of approval from people who didn't even like me? "I don't know," I admitted. "After Elena died, I guess I was lonely. I wanted to feel useful again." Useful and used are two different things, Hermana. Useful is when people appreciate what you do and treat you with respect. Used is when they take your help for granted and then abandon you at a truck stop. She was right, of course. I'd confused being needed with being valued, just like I'd written in my manifesto at 3 a.m. in that Nevada truck stop. But hearing it, from Carmen, who'd known me when I was strong and confident and sure of my own worth, made the distinction crystal clear. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "Now? Now you remind them who Sandra Martinez really is. Not with revenge, that's beneath you, but with consequences, real ones." After I hung up with Carmen, I called Frank from across the hall. The 73-year-old retired electrician had always treated me with genuine respect, the kind of old-school courtesy that had nothing to do with what I could do for him and everything to do with basic human decency. "Sandra, dear, "How was your trip?" he asked when he opened his door. "Complicated," I said. "Frank, can I ask you something? Have you noticed anything off about Jake and Brittany lately?" He frowned, glancing toward the stairwell that led to their apartment. "Well, since you mention it, there's been a lot of yelling down there, and I've seen some official-looking mail piling up outside their door when they're not home, the kind that usually means trouble." "What kind of official mail?" "Legal notices, looks like. And I think I saw an eviction notice last week, but I didn't want to pry." An eviction notice. That explained the desperation, the increasing frequency of their emergencies that required my help. They weren't just having financial problems. They were about to lose their apartment. "Frank," I said carefully, "if someone you'd been helping for months abandoned you in the middle of nowhere as a joke, what would you do?" His face darkened. "I'd make sure they understood that actions have consequences. The older I get, the less patience I have for people who think they can treat others badly just because they can get away with it." That evening, I drove to the impound lot to pick up my car. Officer Martinez had been right about the damage. There were stains on the seats that looked like spilled alcohol, scratches on the dashboard where someone had carelessly thrown keys or bottles, and the whole interior smelled like a combination of beer, cheap cologne, and cigarette smoke. They'd treated my vehicle like a rental car they'd never have to see again. I took photos of everything, documenting each stain and scratch with the methodical thoroughness that had served me well in military logistics. If I decided to pursue insurance claims or legal action, I wanted evidence that would stand up in court. As I drove home, I noticed Jake's Honda in the parking lot of our apartment complex. They were back from Vegas, probably crafting their apology strategy or figuring out how to make this all my fault somehow. I parked my SUV and sat for a moment, looking up at their apartment windows where the lights were on, and I could see the shadows of people moving around. Part of me wanted to march up there immediately and confront them with everything I'd learned. But the smarter part, the part that had learned patience and strategic thinking in the Army, told me to wait. Let them sweat a little, let them wonder what I was planning, let them make the first move so I could see exactly how they intended to play this. I didn't have to wait long. At 8 p.m., there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Jake standing in the hallway, holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing the kind of sheepish expression that probably worked on people who didn't know him as well as I now did. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the door. "Sandra, thank God," he said, immediately launching into what was obviously a prepared speech. "I am so sorry about what happened. The whole thing got way out of hand, and I know we hurt your feelings. These are for you." He held out the flowers, which looked like they'd cost about $5.99 at the corner store. "My feelings," I repeated, not taking the flowers. "Yeah, I know you're upset, and you have every right to be. It was supposed to be just a harmless prank, but we didn't think about how it would affect you. We were drunk and stupid, and we're really sorry." Behind him, I could see Brittany lurking at the bottom of the stairs, clearly wanting to be part of this conversation, but not quite brave enough to face me directly. "Jake," I said calmly, "did you file a police report about my car being stolen?" His face went pale. "What? No, Why would you ask that?" "Because this morning you called me and told me my car had been stolen from a casino parking garage. You said you'd called the police. I was wondering if you could give me the report number for my insurance." He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again without any words coming out. I could practically see him trying to calculate how much I knew and whether he could still lie his way out of this. The thing is, I said, you lied to me. Not only did you abandon me at a truck stop, not only did you refuse to return my car when I asked for it, but when the police tracked you down this morning, you tried to make me think my car had been stolen so you wouldn't have to face the consequences of your actions. Sandra, you called the police? His voice cracked slightly. I called the police when you refused to return my property, which, legally speaking, makes what you did theft. Brittany finally found the courage to come upstairs, her eyes red with what looked like genuine tears. Sandra, please don't make this into a big legal thing. We're so sorry. We know we messed up, but we're going through a really hard time, right? Now and... You're going through a hard time? I interrupted. Brittany, I spent Friday night stranded at a truck stop in the middle of the desert. because you thought it would be funny to abandon me there. I had to buy bus tickets and hotel rooms and spend an entire weekend getting home because you decided my feelings didn't matter as much as your vacation plans. But it was just a joke, Jake protested. We weren't trying to actually hurt you. We just thought, you're always saying how you can handle anything, so we figured you'd be fine. There it was. The same logic they'd used to justify everything. Because I was competent, because I could handle problems, because I'd always fixed things. For them before, they thought I didn't deserve basic consideration or respect. Jake, I said, what would you do if I took your car keys right now and drove off, leaving you stranded here with no way to get to work tomorrow? That's different. How is it different? Because we're young and we need our jobs and our car and I don't? Because I'm older, my job doesn't matter, my time doesn't matter, my safety doesn't matter. He looked genuinely confused, as if he'd never considered that I might have the same basic human needs and concerns as people his own age. Brittany stepped forward, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she used when she wanted something. Sandra, we think of you like family. You're like our mom or our aunt or something. Family forgives each other, right? Family, I repeated. Is that what this is? Of course. We love you, Sandra. You're so important to us. I looked at both of them standing in my doorway, him with his cheap flowers and her with her crocodile tears, and felt something settle into place in my chest like a puzzle piece finding its proper position. If I'm family, I said, why did you introduce me to your friends as just our neighbor? If I'm so important to you, why did you tell people I was like your building's maintenance guy but free? If you love me so much, why did you laugh about abandoning me and take pictures of my reaction for your entertainment? They exchanged glances, clearly not expecting me to have such specific examples of their disrespect. Those were just... We didn't mean... Jake started. You meant exactly what you said, I interrupted. The truth is, you don't think of me as family. You think of me as hired help who works for free. You think of me as a resource to be used when convenient and discarded. When I'm not. That's not true. Brittany protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and showed them a screenshot I'd taken of Jake's Instagram story from Saturday night, a video of him and his friends partying in a Vegas club with the caption, Epic. Boys' weekend. Thanks to our ride home for making this possible. Your ride home? I asked. Is that what I am to you? Jake's face went red. Sandra, you're taking this way too seriously. It was just social media. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything, Jake. It means that even when you were using my car, staying in hotels I helped you research, having the time of your lives on a trip you couldn't have taken without my help, you still couldn't bring yourself to acknowledge me as a person who mattered. I took a step back and started to close the door. I think we're done here. Wait. Brittany grabbed the doorframe. Sandra, please. You can't just... We need to work this out. We're neighbors. We have to live in the same building. Actually, I said, I don't think we do. I pulled out the printed copy of my research, the one that detailed their financial situation and housing problems. Their eyes widened as they recognized bank statements, court documents, employment records, information they thought was private. Eviction hearing is Thursday at 2 p.m., I said calmly. Rent 3 months overdue, new management company doesn't offer payment plans. Jake, your company is laying off another 20% of their workforce next month. I have a contact at the local business journal who confirmed it. Brittany Lux Style is closing permanently on Friday. The owner's bankruptcy filing is public record. They stared at me in shock, probably wondering how the helpful neighbor they'd been manipulating had suddenly turned into someone who knew more about their lives than they'd told their own families. Why did you... Brittany stammered. Because, I said, when someone abandons me in the desert and then lies to me about stealing my car, I like to understand who I'm dealing with. I like to know what their motivations are, what they're capable of, and what kind of consequences they're already facing for their poor decision-making. Jake found his voice first. Sandra, if you know we're in trouble, then you know why we needed this weekend. We're probably going to lose our apartment. We might lose our jobs. We just wanted one last good time before everything falls apart. So, you decided to make your problems my problems. We didn't think of it that way. Of course you didn't. You never think about how your actions affect other people. That's exactly the problem. I held up the letter I'd written earlier, the one that laid out everything I knew and everything I was prepared to do about it. I wrote this for you, I said. It explains your options going forward. You can apologize sincerely, make meaningful amends for what you did, and hope I decide not to pursue legal action. Or you can keep pretending this was just a harmless prank and see what happens when someone with my resources and my patience decides to make your life as complicated as you made mine. Brittany was crying harder now, real tears this time. Sandra, we can't afford legal problems right now. We're barely hanging on as it is. Then you probably shouldn't have stolen my car and abandoned me in Nevada. I handed Jake the letter and stepped back into my apartment. You have 24 hours to read that and decide how you want to handle this. Choose wisely. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt, then stood there listening to them whisper frantically in the hallway before their footsteps retreated down the stairs. For the first time since Friday night, I felt like myself again. Not the useful neighbor, not the reliable problem solver, not the woman who absorbed other people's cruelty with grace and understanding. Just Sandra Martinez, who had served her country with honor, who had built a life on her own terms, and who was done accepting less respect than she gave. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down to wait for their response, feeling calmer and more centered than I had in months. Whatever they decided, I was ready for it. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm for the first time in months. Not from anxiety, but from a strange sense of anticipation. I'd slept better than I had since Elena died, the kind of deep, restorative sleep that comes when you stop carrying other people's problems on your shoulders. Outside my window, I could see Jake's Honda still parked in the same spot, which meant they were home and presumably reading the letter I'd given them. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, opening my laptop to continue the work I'd started over the weekend. The business plan I'd been putting off for 2 years was suddenly crystal clear in my mind. Martinez Logistics Solutions, helping small and medium-sized businesses streamline their operations, reduce costs, and improve efficiency. All the skills I'd developed in the Army, all the experience I'd gained in the civilian workforce, finally channeled into something that was mine. The phone rang at 8:30 a.m. Jake's number. Sandra, we need to talk, he said without preamble. His voice sounded different, smaller, more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. I'm listening. Not on the phone. Can we come up? Please? 20 minutes later, they were back at my door, but the dynamic had completely shifted. Gone was Jake's casual confidence, replaced by the nervous energy of someone who'd finally realized they were in serious trouble. Brittany looked like she'd been crying all night, her usually perfect makeup smeared and her designer clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. We read your letter, Jake said, as I let them into my living room. And we had no idea you knew all that stuff about us. I didn't respond, just waited for them to continue. One of the first things they teach you in military leadership is the power of silence. Sometimes the best way to get information is to create space for the other person to fill. Brittany spoke next, her voice barely above a whisper. Sandra, we're so sorry. We really are. We know what we did was wrong, and we know sorry isn't enough, but we don't know what else to say. You could start by explaining why you thought it was acceptable to abandon me in the middle of nowhere. They exchanged glances, clearly having discussed this conversation beforehand. Jake cleared his throat and launched into what was obviously a prepared explanation. We were drunk, and we made a really stupid decision. Honestly, we thought you were trying too hard to fit in with our friend group, and it was making everyone uncomfortable. Tyler and Marcus kept making jokes about having a chaperone, and we didn't know how to tell you that that we needed some space. So, instead of having an adult conversation, you decided to strand me at a truck stop. We didn't think it through, Brittany added quickly. We just thought it would be easier if you weren't there, and we figured you'd be able to get home on your own because you're so capable. There was that word again. Capable. As if my competence was a character flaw that justified their cruelty. Let me make sure I understand, I said slowly. You invited me on this trip specifically to use my car, then abandoned me because you were embarrassed to be seen with me, then lied about my car being stolen to avoid facing the consequences. Is that accurate? When you put it like that, it sounds really bad, Jake said defensively. It sounds bad because it is bad, Jake. It's not a matter of perspective or interpretation. You committed theft, abandonment, and fraud. Those are crimes, not social awkwardness. Brittany started crying again, the kind of desperate sobbing that I recognized from my years dealing with soldiers who'd gotten themselves into serious trouble. Sandra, please don't destroy our lives over this. We know we messed up, but we're already losing everything. Our jobs, our apartment, our whole future. If you press charges or sue us or whatever, we'll end up homeless and unemployed and we'll never be able to dig out of this hole. I looked at her tear-streaked face and felt nothing. No sympathy, no urge to comfort her, no desire to minimize my own hurt to make her feel better. For the first time in our entire relationship, I was seeing her clearly. Not as the struggling young woman I'd been trying to help, but as someone who'd made a series of bad choices and was now looking for someone else to clean up the mess. Brittany, I said, 3 days ago you abandoned me at a truck stop because you thought it would be funny. You took my car, trashed the interior, lied to me about it being stolen, and showed no concern whatsoever for my safety or well-being. Now, you want me to worry about your future? But you're not like us, Jake said, his frustration showing through his attempted contrition. You've got money saved, you've got a stable job, you own your car outright, you can handle problems. We're just trying to survive, and there it was, the assumption that had underlain every interaction we'd ever had. Because I was older, because I was financially stable, because I'd learned to take care of myself, they thought I didn't deserve the same consideration they expected for themselves. Jake, I said, do you know why I have money saved? Why I have a stable job? Why I own my car outright? He shrugged, clearly not seeing where this was going. Because I spent 12 years in the Army learning discipline and responsibility. Because I've never bought anything I couldn't afford. Because I've worked 60-hour weeks for the past 6 years to build financial security. Because I've made sacrifices and smart choices consistently over decades. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the parking lot where my SUV sat next to his beat-up Honda. You think my stability gives you the right to treat me badly, but you've got it backward. My stability means I don't have to tolerate bad treatment from anyone. I don't need your friendship. I don't need your approval. I don't need anything from you at all. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear them processing the implications of what I just said. So, what happens now? Brittany asked finally. I turned back to face them, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile that had made junior officers nervous when they'd screwed up and were about to find out exactly how much trouble they were in. Now you have a choice to make. You can continue trying to minimize what you did and hope I'll just let it go, or you can accept full responsibility and make meaningful amends. What kind of amends? Jake asked warily. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. Inside were several documents, a written apology template, a payment schedule for the damages to my car, a list of references they would need to provide to vouch for their character, and a timeline for completing various tasks. First, you're going to write a complete, detailed apology acknowledging what you did and why it was wrong. Not, we're sorry your feelings were hurt, but a real admission of wrongdoing. I handed Jake the template I'd prepared. Second, you're going to pay for the damage to my car. The estimate from the detailing service is $400. You can pay it in installments if necessary, but it will be paid in full within 60 days. Sandra, we don't have $400, Brittany protested. Then you'll get it. Sell something, pick up extra shifts, ask your families for help. That's not my problem to solve. I continued down the list. Third, you're going to provide me with 3 character references, people who can vouch that this behavior is completely out of character for you and that you understand the seriousness of what you did. Why do you need character references? Because I'm still deciding whether to press charges. If you can demonstrate that this was an aberration and not a pattern, that might influence my decision. Jake was looking increasingly panicked. Sandra, this is crazy. You're treating this like we committed some major crime. You did commit a major crime. Vehicle theft is a felony in Nevada. So is fraud. So is abandonment in some circumstances. I pulled out the final document, a timeline showing exactly when they needed to complete each requirement. You have one. Week to provide the written apologies. 2 weeks to get me the character references, 60 days to pay for the car damage. If you meet all these requirements and demonstrate genuine remorse and changed behavior, I'll consider this matter closed." "And if we don't?" Brittany asked, though she clearly didn't want to hear the answer. "Then I'll proceed with both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. I'll also make sure that everyone in our social circle, every person you've introduced, me too, every neighbor in this building, every mutual acquaintance we have, knows exactly what you did and how you responded when given the chance to make it right." The threat of social consequences seemed to hit them harder than the legal ones. Jake's face went white. "You'd really do that? Ruin our reputations over this?" "Jake, you ruined your own reputations when you abandoned someone who'd been nothing but helpful to you. I'm just offering you a chance to take responsibility before everyone finds out what kind of people you really are." I walked back to the door and opened it, a clear signal that our conversation was over. "1 week for the apologies," I repeated. "I suggest you start by figuring out what you're actually sorry for, because sorry you're upset isn't going to cut it." After they left, I sat down at my computer and opened a new document. It was time to start reaching out to the people I'd neglected while I was busy being Jake and Brittany's unpaid assistant. Carmen in Denver, who'd been trying to get me to visit. My former squad leader, Miguel, who'd started his own security consulting firm in Texas. My old colleague, Janet, from the shipping company, who'd left to start her own logistics business and had mentioned wanting to bring me on as a partner. For 2 years, I'd been so focused on trying to fit into Jake and Brittany's world that I'd ignored opportunities to reconnect with people who actually valued what I brought to the table. People who saw my military experience as an asset, not an eccentricity. People who understood that competence wasn't a character flaw, but a valuable quality that deserved respect. I started with Carmen, typing out an email that was long overdue. "Carmen, you've been trying to get me to visit Denver for months. If the offer is still open, I'd love to come out next weekend. I've got some major life changes happening, and I could use the perspective of someone who knew me when I was strong. Also, remember that logistics business we used to talk about starting together? I think it's time to get serious about that conversation." Next, I reached out to Miguel. His security firm specialized in helping businesses assess and improve their operational security, which was closely related to the kind of efficiency consulting I wanted to do. Maybe there was an opportunity for collaboration, or at least networking. Then, I called my insurance company to officially report the damage to my car and start the claims process. The representative was much more helpful this time, now that I had police reports and documentation. "Ma'am, this is clearly a case of vandalism and theft," she said after reviewing my file. "We'll cover the full cost of repairs minus your deductible, and if you decide to pursue legal action, we can provide documentation to support your case." By noon, I had responded to 3 job opportunities I'd been ignoring, scheduled 2 business meetings for the following week, and made plans to visit Carmen in Denver over the weekend. For the first time in months, my calendar was full of things I actually wanted to do, instead of obligations to people who didn't appreciate me. The knock on my door came at 2 p.m. This time it was Frank from across the hall, holding a plate of homemade cookies and looking concerned. "Sandra, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I couldn't help overhearing some raised voices earlier. Is everything all right with those young people downstairs?" I invited him in and gave him the abbreviated version of what had happened. Frank listened with the kind of attention that comes from decades of life experience, nodding at key points and asking thoughtful questions. "Well," he said when I finished, "it sounds like they learned an important lesson about consequences, though I suspect they're not done trying to wiggle out of taking responsibility." "What makes you say that?" "I saw them both leave about an hour ago, all dressed up like they were going somewhere important. And I heard Brittany on the phone in the stairwell crying to someone about how you were ruining their lives over a harmless prank." I wasn't surprised. People like Jake and Brittany rarely accepted responsibility without first exhausting every other option. They were probably visiting family members or friends, trying to drum up support for their version of events. "Frank," I said, "if anyone asks you about what happened, would you mind sticking to the facts? I'm not asking you to take sides, just don't let them rewrite history." He patted my hand with the gentle firmness of someone who'd raised 3 daughters and knew how to spot manipulation. "Sandra, in my 73 years, I've learned that people who abandon their friends at truck stops don't usually stop at just one bad decision. You're doing the right thing by holding them accountable." That evening, I got a text from Jake. We talked to our families about what happened. Everyone thinks you're being way too harsh. This could have been handled between friends without all the legal threats. I stared at the message for a long moment, marveling at the audacity. They'd spent the day painting themselves as victims of my unreasonable demands, conveniently leaving out the part where they'd committed theft and abandonment. I typed back, "Your family wasn't stranded at a truck stop in Nevada, so their opinion on what's too harsh isn't really relevant. You have 6 days left to provide those written apologies." His response came quickly. "Fine, but you should know that everyone thinks you're being vindictive and petty." This time I didn't respond at all. Let him think whatever he wanted. Let his family and friends think whatever they wanted. I was done. Caring about the opinions of people who thought theft and abandonment were acceptable behavior as long as the victim was capable enough to handle it. I had more important things to focus on, like the email I just received from Carmen saying she'd cleared her whole weekend to spend time with me and couldn't wait to hear about my major life changes. Like the message from Miguel inviting me to bid on a consulting contract with a mid-sized manufacturing company in Phoenix. Like the growing sense that my real life was finally about to begin. The woman who desperately wanted Jake and Brittany's approval was gone, abandoned at that truck stop along with my illusions about who they really were. The woman sitting in this apartment was someone I recognized from my army days. Competent, self-sufficient, and completely uninterested in begging for respect from people who'd proven they didn't deserve it. I didn't have to wait long to see Jake and Brittany's. Next move. Wednesday morning, I found a folded piece of notebook paper slipped under my door. The kind of half-hearted gesture that told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were taking my requirements. The apology was 3 sentences, long, written in Brittany's looping handwriting. "We're sorry for what happened in Vegas. We didn't mean to hurt your feelings. We hope we can move past this and be friends again." I read it twice, then threw it in the trash. It wasn't an apology. It was a check-the-box exercise that showed they still didn't understand what they'd done wrong or why it mattered. There was no acknowledgement of theft, no admission of deliberately abandoning me, no recognition of the lies they'd told afterward. Just the passive voice construction of people who refuse to take responsibility for their actions. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "We left the apology letter under your door. Can we consider this handled now?" I screenshot the message and added it to my growing file of documentation. Their eagerness to rush through the consequences told me everything I needed to know about how likely they were to change their behavior in the future. Instead of responding to Jake, I called Officer Martinez in Las Vegas. "I've been thinking about pressing charges," I told her. "The people who stole my car are showing no genuine remorse, and I'm concerned they'll do something like this to someone else." "That's certainly your right, ma'am. The evidence is solid, and this type of behavior often escalates if there aren't real consequences. Would you like me to initiate the paperwork?" "Let me give them until Friday to meet the requirements," I set. "If they can't manage even basic accountability, then yes, I want to proceed with charges." "Understood. I'll prepare the documentation and wait for your call." Thursday was my day off, which I'd originally planned to spend catching up on household chores and maybe doing some reading. Instead, I found myself with a calendar full of activities that actually mattered. I had a video call with Carmen about the logistics business we'd discussed, a meeting with a potential client Miguel had referred to me, and most importantly, I was finally ready to clean out Elena's things. I'd been putting off going through my sister's belongings for 2 years, telling myself I wasn't ready, that it was too painful, that I'd deal with it later. But sitting in Elena's bedroom, surrounded by her books and photographs and carefully organized belongings, I realized I'd been avoiding more than just grief. I'd been avoiding the reminder of who I used to be when Elena was alive to witness my life. In her desk drawer, I found a folder labeled Sandra's Business Ideas in Elena's precise teacher handwriting. Inside were printouts of emails I'd sent her over the years, describing various plans for starting my own consulting firm. Business plans I'd sketched out but never acted on, market research I'd compiled but never used, contacts I'd made but never followed up with. Elena had saved every single one, along with handwritten notes in the margins. "This is brilliant. Why isn't she doing this?" And Sandra doesn't realize how valuable her expertise is, and she needs to stop waiting for permission to be successful. At the bottom of the folder was a letter addressed to me, sealed but never sent. My hands shook as I opened it. Sandra, it began in Elena's familiar script, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've finally worked up the courage to go through my things. I'm writing this after our conversation last week when you told me about Jake and Brittany treating you like their personal assistant. I wanted to say something then, but I know you weren't ready to hear it. You are the most competent person I've ever known. You can organize anything, solve any problem, handle any crisis. But somewhere along the way, you started believing that your worth came from how useful you were to other people instead of who you are as a person. You started accepting crumbs of appreciation from people who should have been grateful for the privilege of knowing you. I know you're lonely since Dad died, since your army friends scattered, since you left the structure of military life. But loneliness isn't a reason to accept disrespect. You taught me that when we were kids and the neighbor kids were mean to me. You said, Elena, it's better to be alone with your dignity than surrounded by people who don't value you. Take your own advice, Hermana. Stop making yourself small to fit into other people's small lives. Start the business. Take the risks. Be the person you were meant to be instead of the person other people find convenient. You don't need anyone's permission to matter. You already matter. You always have. Love, Elena, P.S. I've been putting money aside for your business startup. Fund. It's in the safe deposit box at First National. Key is taped under my jewelry box. Don't you dare use it for anything except building the life you deserve. I sat on Elena's bed and cried for 20 minutes. Not the exhausted, hopeless crying of someone who'd hit rock bottom, but the cathartic tears of someone finally ready to stop hiding from their own potential. Elena had seen what I'd been too afraid to acknowledge, that I'd been settling for being useful instead of pursuing being successful, accepting the role of supporting character instead of writing my own story. The safe deposit box contained $47,000 in cash and certificates of deposit, along with a note that said, Martinez Logistics Solutions Startup Fund. Elena believed in you even when you didn't believe in yourself. I drove straight from the bank to a coffee shop and called Carmen. I'm ready, I said when she picked up. Ready for what? Everything. The business partnership, the move to Denver, the complete life overhaul. Elena left me startup money and a letter telling me to stop making myself small to fit into other people's small lives. Carmen was quiet for a moment, then said, It's about damn time. When can you get here? Next week? I need to finish handling some business here first. What kind of business? I told her about Jake and Brittany's pathetic excuse for an apology, about the charges I was considering filing, about the decision I'd made to stop accepting anything less than genuine accountability. Good, Carmen said firmly. People like that count on their victims being too polite or too tired to fight back. Make sure they understand that actions have consequences. That evening, I was packing Elena's books when I heard shouting from the apartment below. Through my floor, I could make out Jake's voice raised in anger, though I couldn't distinguish the words. Then I heard a door slam, followed by the sound of someone crying. Probably Brittany. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Brittany standing alone in the hallway, her face red and blotchy from crying. Sandra, please, she said when I opened the door. I need to talk to you. About what? About Jake. About everything. Can I come in? Against my better judgment, I led her into my living room. She looked around at the boxes I'd been packing, the business plan spread across my coffee table, the evidence of a life being actively reorganized. You're moving? She asked. I'm making changes. She sat down heavily on my couch, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Sandra, Jake and I broke up tonight. He said this whole thing with you was my fault, that I was the one who came up with the idea to leave you at the truck stop. I waited for her to continue, curious to see where this was going. But that's not true, she said, her voice gaining strength. It was his idea. He said you were embarrassing us in front of his friends, that you were trying too hard to fit in and making everyone uncomfortable. He said it would be funny to ditch you somewhere and see how long it took you to figure out we weren't coming back. And you went along with it? I was drunk, and I was stupid, and I thought... She trailed off, then started again. I thought it would be mean but not really harmful. Like, you're so capable and smart, I figured you'd just call an Uber or something and be fine. There was that word again. Capable. As if my competence was a shield that protected me from being hurt by their cruelty. Brittany, I said. Do you understand what you just told me? What do you mean? You just admitted that Jake specifically planned to abandon me as a form of entertainment. That's not a prank that went too far. That's premeditated cruelty. Her face went pale. I didn't think of it that way. Of course you didn't. You've never had to think about what it feels like to be abandoned somewhere because you've never been in a position where people saw you as disposable. She started crying again, but this time it seemed more genuine. Sandra, I know we messed up. I know that stupid letter Jake made me write wasn't a real apology, but I don't know how to make this right. I don't know what you want from us. Want you to understand that I'm a person with feelings and dignity, not a resource to be used and discarded. I want you to acknowledge that what you did was cruel and potentially dangerous, and I want you to take responsibility for your choices, instead of blaming alcohol or peer pressure or anything else. Okay, she said, wiping her eyes. You're right. All of that is true. We treated you terribly, and there's no excuse for it. For the first time since this whole mess started, I heard something that sounded like genuine remorse. Not self-pity, not excuses, just acknowledgement of wrongdoing. What happens now? She asked. Now you write a real apology. Not 3 sentences about hurt feelings, but a detailed acknowledgement of what you did and why it was wrong. You figure out how to pay for the damage to my car, and you accept that there will be consequences for your actions. What kind of consequences? I pulled out my phone and showed her the email I'd drafted to send to everyone in our social circle. Neighbors, mutual friends, people who'd been at parties where I'd been introduced as the handy neighbor or the building maintenance person. I'm going to tell everyone what happened, I said, not to be vindictive, but because people deserve to know what kind of person they're dealing with. If you can abandon someone who's been nothing but helpful to you, what else are you capable of? She read the email with growing horror. Sandra, this will ruin us. Nobody will want to be friends with us if they know what we did. Then you should have thought about that before you did it. But what about second chances? What about forgiveness? I looked at her sitting on my couch, still thinking about what she could get from me instead of what she owed me, and felt something settle into place. Brittany, I said, forgiveness isn't the same thing as pretending something didn't happen. I can forgive you for being cruel and still make sure other people know you're capable of cruelty. I can forgive you for abandoning me and still pursue legal consequences for theft. So there's nothing I can do to make this go away. You can take full responsibility, make meaningful amends, and accept the consequences of your actions. That's what adults do when they screw up. She was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd said. Finally, she looked up at me with something that might have been respect. You're not the same person you were last week, she said. No, I'm not. Last week I was someone who cared more about being liked than being respected. That person is gone. After Brittany left, I sat down at my computer and finalized the email I'd been drafting. It was calm, factual, and devastating. A detailed account of what had happened, with timestamps and documentation, sent to everyone who'd ever seen me playing the role of helpful neighbor. The responses started coming within an hour. Frank, from across the hall. I always knew something was off about those two. You're well rid of them. Maria, from next door. Sandra, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I never trusted them after the way they talked about you when you weren't around. Even people I barely knew were reaching out with support and offers to help. Mrs. Chen from the 3rd floor? If you need character references for legal proceedings, I'll be happy to provide one. What they did was unconscionable. But the most meaningful response came from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Tyler, one of Jake's friends who'd been on the Vegas trip. Sandra, his message read, I need to apologize for my part in what happened. I was drunk and stupid, but that's not an excuse. What we did was wrong, and I'm ashamed that I went along with it. Jake told us you were okay with the plan, but I should have questioned that. I should have insisted we bring you with us or take you home. I'm sorry for being a coward when you needed someone to stand up for you. I stared at Tyler's message for a long time, recognizing something I'd rarely encountered in the past few days. Genuine accountability. No excuses, no minimizing, no attempts to make himself look better. just acknowledgement of wrongdoing and sincere remorse. I wrote back, "Tyler, thank you for this message. It takes courage to admit when you've done something wrong, and I appreciate your honesty. This is what real accountability looks like." As I prepared for bed that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because my problems were solved, but because I'd finally stopped trying to manage other people's feelings about the consequences of their own actions. I'd stopped accepting crumbs of respect from people who should have been grateful for my friendship. I'd stopped making myself small to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. Tomorrow I would call Officer Martinez and proceed with pressing charges. Tomorrow I would continue planning my move to Denver and my new business. Tomorrow I would keep building the life Elena had challenged me to create. But tonight, I was simply Sandra Martinez, competent, self-sufficient, and finally done apologizing for taking up space in the world. 6 months later, I was sitting in first class on a flight back to Phoenix, sipping champagne and reviewing the quarterly reports for Martinez Logistics Solutions. My company had grown beyond my wildest expectations. 3 major clients, 2 employees, and enough revenue to justify the first-class ticket I'd treated myself to. But this wasn't a pleasure trip. I was flying back for Jake's sentencing hearing. He'd refused every plea deal, insisting he was the victim of a vindictive woman who couldn't take a joke. The trial had been swift and decisive. Security footage, phone records, and Brittany's detailed confession left no room for doubt. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Brittany had taken a different path. She'd pled guilty, testified against Jake, and was serving 6 months of community service while paying restitution. She'd gotten a job at a nonprofit helping veterans transition to civilian life. Her supervisor told me she was one of their most dedicated volunteers. As the plane descended into Phoenix, I smiled, thinking about the irony. They'd left me at a truck stop thinking I was worthless, disposable, too old to matter. Now I was flying first class to watch one of them face justice, while the other had learned to value service over selfishness. Sometimes the best revenge, really, is living well. The woman who begged for crumbs of approval from people half her age was gone forever. In her place was Sandra Martinez, successful entrepreneur, respected consultant, and living proof that it's never too late to stop accepting less than you deserve. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. We all have moments when we need to remember our worth and stop accepting disrespect from people who should be grateful to know us. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about finding your strength, setting boundaries, and building the life you actually deserve. Your future self will thank you. What's your truck stop moment? Share it in the comments below.